She couldn't speak for herself. But her silence spoke volumes. Lorraine's story isn't just about pain. It's about injustice buried beneath generations of secrets. Denial and neglect. Nearly 50 years later, the truth still cries out for justice. This is justice for Lorraine, surviving rape. Demanding truth, Lorraine was born in the quiet hills of West Virginia, into a family that lived far from the world's noise, a family known not for their warmth but for their strangeness. The Whiters, a name that would one day become infamous after the world caught a glimpse of their lives through the lens of a camera. But before the interviews, before the headlines, before the viral videos, there was Lorraine, a young girl who could not speak, but who understood everything. Those who knew her described her as gentle, shy, and sweet. Her eyes, they said, told stories her lips never could. She loved being around her siblings, though she was often ignored or teased. She couldn't read or write, and her words came out in sounds that most people couldn't understand, but she felt. She laughed. She cried. She understood. She was human, and like every human being, she deserved safety, dignity, and protection, but Lorraine was never truly protected when she was a child. The people who were supposed to love her, the ones who were supposed to protect her, failed her in the worst possible way. Somewhere in that small, rundown home, away from the world's eyes, Lorraine was raped. She became pregnant. And no one ever called the police. They said nothing. They did nothing. They let the silence swallow her pain. Her family, Betty, Larry, Kenny, all admitted later that Lorraine had been R-worded. But the way they said it, the tone, the shrug, the way their faces didn't match their words, it was chilling. There was no outrage, no sorrow, just acceptance, as if it were normal, as if it didn't matter. She was R-worded and she got pregnant, they said. And that was that. But Lorraine's pregnancy was the evidence of a crime that destroyed her innocence and changed her life forever. That child, born out of violence, was named Timmy, a boy who would grow up not knowing who his father was, and not fully understanding the darkness that surrounded his birth. When Mark from Soft White Underbelly sat with the Whiters and revealed to the audience that Timmy was Lorraine's son, the internet gasped. People around the world were stunned. How could this have happened? How could a family let something like this go without justice? And then came the whispers. The theories, the rumors. Some said a stranger did it. Others said it was one of her brothers. People pointed at Timmy's face and said he looked too much like Kenny, too much like Larry, but there was no proof. No investigation. No justice. And that's where the pain deepens, not just for Lorraine, but for every woman who's ever been silenced, ignored, or dismissed because of her disability. Lorraine couldn't consent. She couldn't defend herself. And yet she was forced to bear the consequence of someone else's crime. For years, the truth was hidden under a blanket of denial and family shame. The world moved on. The Whiters continued living their strange, isolated lives, and Lorraine, sweet, innocent Lorraine, lived in silence, but silence doesn't erase truth, and silence doesn't erase guilt. Today, West Virginia has eliminated the criminal statute of limitations for felony sex offenses, including rape. That means Lorraine's case, even though it happened nearly 50 years ago, could still be investigated. Justice can still be served. And justice must be served, because Lorraine's story isn't just about one woman. It's about what happens when society ignores the vulnerable, when families protect their secrets instead of their children, when victims are forgotten simply because they can't speak for themselves. The pain that Lorraine carried in her silence is the pain of every person who has ever been told their suffering doesn't matter. It's the pain of every woman who has been gaslighted, blamed, or dismissed. It's the pain of every child who was told to forget what happened. And even though Lorraine can't speak, the truth is speaking for her now. When we look into her eyes, those quiet, soulful eyes, we see a lifetime of hurt, but we also see something else. Resilience. Survival. Strength. Because Lorraine is still here. She survived, and her survival itself is an act of defiance. A refusal to be erased. We must ask, why didn't anyone protect Lorraine? Why wasn't her attacker brought to justice? Why did the people around her stay silent? The answers to those questions are buried deep in layers of generational dysfunction, secrecy, and shame, layers that have been passed down through families like the Whiters for decades, but no amount of denial can cover the truth forever. The truth always finds its way out, and when it does, it demands accountability. Lorraine's case is not just a family tragedy, it's a failure of an entire system. A system that often looks the other way when victims are poor, disabled, or mentally challenged. A system that still struggles to believe survivors when they can't tell their stories in words. Lorraine's story forces us to confront a painful question. How many other Lorraines are out there? How many voices have been silenced because society decided they weren't credible enough to deserve justice? This story is not just a retelling. It's a demand, a plea for justice, because Lorraine's silence deserves to be heard. Timmy, now nearly 50 years old, lives with the shadow of a truth he never asked for. He didn't choose how he was brought into this world. He didn't choose the pain his mother endured. But his existence is proof, living proof, of the crime that was committed. It's not too late for the truth. It's not too late for accountability. It's not too late for justice. Lorraine deserves peace. Timmy deserves answers, and the world deserves to know what really happened in that small West Virginia home all those years ago. If we stay silent, we become part of the cover-up. If we ignore Lorraine's story, we deny justice not only to her, but to every victim who has ever been silenced. The truth doesn't expire, and neither does justice. Lorraine may not have words, but her story speaks louder than any scream. It's time for the world to listen. Comment below. Should Lorraine's case be reopened? Do you believe the truth about what happened will ever come out? Your voice matters. Because justice begins with those who are willing to speak. When others can't, this is only the beginning. Lorraine's story did not unfold in the light. It was born in the shadows, behind closed doors, inside a crumbling house that stood as both a home and a prison. The Whiter family became known to the world only when soft white underbelly captured their lives on film, their tangled history of poverty, mental illness, and inbreeding laid bare for millions to see. But before the cameras ever arrived, Lorraine's truth had already been buried under decades of silence. For most of her life, Lorraine was treated as a child. She never fully developed the ability to communicate through words. Her thoughts lived behind her eyes, her feelings trapped inside her body. Yet those who observed her, even briefly, could tell she was aware. She understood tone. She reacted to emotion. She could sense kindness and danger, and somewhere in her youth, danger found her. The man who took advantage of Lorraine wasn't just any stranger on the street. He was someone close enough to be trusted, close enough to move freely through the same space, close enough to betray her in the most devastating way. The Whiters never called the police. They never went to a doctor. They never sought help. They said nothing. Instead, they watched as Lorraine's belly began to grow, a visible sign of what had happened to her, a living reminder of a crime they refused to acknowledge. And then came Timmy. Timmy's birth should have sparked outrage. It should have brought the authorities to their door. But instead, the family treated it as just another thing that happened. Lorraine gave birth, and the world kept turning. No investigation. No justice. No truth. For decades, the secret stayed hidden within that family. Only when the world saw the Whiters on soft white underbelly did the pieces begin to fall into place. The world met Timmy, a man in his late 40s, simple-minded, kind, and lost in his own way. We saw Lorraine, quiet, withdrawn, fragile. And then the bombshell came. Timmy was Lorraine's son. When Mark later asked, "Who is Timmy's father?" there was hesitation, nervous glances, then a chilling admission. Oh, she was raped. The room fell silent. No outrage, no emotion. Just a matter-of-fact acknowledgement of horror for viewers around the world. That moment was unforgettable. Millions of people froze, trying to process what they had just heard. How could something like this have gone unpunished? And then the whispers began again. Online discussions, Reddit threads, YouTube comments, speculation about who did it. Some said it was a stranger. Others were convinced one of her brothers was responsible. People looked at photos of Timmy and pointed out the resemblance to Kenny or Larry, but what matters more than the gossip is the question that never leaves. Why wasn't there an investigation? If Lorraine were any other woman, one who could speak, one who could clearly articulate what had happened to her, the response would have been immediate. Police reports, evidence collection, legal action, but Lorraine was different. She couldn't explain. She couldn't point to her attacker, and because of that, people chose the easier path, silence. That silence protected her rapist. It protected the guilty. It destroyed Lorraine. Imagine being her, living your life surrounded by the people who failed to defend you. The same people who may have known what happened, or worse, may have been involved. Imagine being unable to scream, unable to name your pain, yet forced to relive it every day as you look at the child born from that violence. And then imagine the world calling your story strange, weird, or tragic while no one demanded justice. That is Lorraine's reality when Soft White Underbelly shared their story. Most people focused on the shock value, the inbreeding, the poverty, the bizarre family dynamics. But underneath the viral fascination lies something darker, a woman's rape that has never been properly investigated. Lorraine didn't just need compassion, she needed justice. Timmy didn't just need care, he needed the truth. The Whiters are not just a story about dysfunction. They're a mirror reflecting a society that still ignores the suffering of its most vulnerable. For decades, countless disabled women like Lorraine have been victimized by caregivers, relatives, or trusted adults. In many of these cases, justice never comes. Why? Because people assume these women don't understand. Because their silence is mistaken for acceptance. Because reporting sexual assault within poor, isolated, or disabled communities is inconvenient. But Lorraine's silence was not consent. It was trauma. It was pain. It was survival. And yet, when her family spoke of the assault, there was no sense of accountability. They seemed numb, emotionless, as if it were just one more event in a long chain of tragedy. Betty and Larry both admitted Lorraine was R-worded. But they said it like they were recalling a memory of bad weather. No urgency. No anger. No guilt. That lack of empathy, that cold indifference, reveals a deep sickness that extends beyond one crime. It speaks to generational trauma, to cycles of abuse that have been normalized over decades. The Whiters didn't wake up one day and decide to become broken. They were born into it, raised in isolation, trapped in poverty, disconnected from the world. They became their own world. A world without rules. A world without boundaries. A world where even something as horrific as the rape of a disabled woman could go unchallenged. But ignorance does not excuse evil, and silence does not erase guilt. Lorraine's case could and should still be investigated. West Virginia law now recognizes that sexual violence leaves permanent scars and justice should not be bound by time. No statute of limitations means that even after 50 years, Lorraine's rapist can still be held accountable. The evidence may be old. Witnesses may lie. Memories may fade. But the truth is written in Lorraine's life, and in Timmy's existence. If DNA testing were done, if investigators revisited the case, if the right people were questioned, the truth could emerge. It would take courage. It would take persistence. It would take someone who actually cares. Lorraine deserves that. This isn't just about punishment. It's about dignity. About giving a woman who couldn't speak a voice, even if it comes decades after the pain began, because Lorraine's story isn't only a crime story. It's a moral story. It challenges us to ask, what happens when a society forgets its most vulnerable? What happens when family loyalty becomes complicity? What happens when silence becomes a way of life? The Whiter silence is haunting. It echoes through every interview, every awkward laugh, every blank stare caught on camera. It's the silence of guilt, fear, and denial. But Lorraine's silence, that's different. Hers is the silence of someone who had no choice, and now, through those who are finally speaking her name, that silence is being broken. The world owes Lorraine more than sympathy. She deserves justice. She deserves truth. She deserves peace. But there's one more thing she deserves: recognition. Not as that woman from YouTube. Not as a curiosity or a viral clip, but as a victim who survived something unimaginably cruel and whose story still matters. Lorraine's pain should never have been a family secret. It should have been a case file, a courtroom testimony, a police investigation. It should have been met with outrage, not indifference. Compassion, not mockery. The fact that her suffering was treated like a passing detail in her family story is heartbreaking, because every time they minimized her trauma, every time they shrugged and moved on, they told the world that Lorraine's pain didn't matter. But it does. Now that Lorraine is under protective care, she finally has a chance to live in peace. Away from the people who failed her, away from the house that held so many secrets. But peace without justice is incomplete. The person who hurt her is still out there, unpunished, unnamed, unaccountable, and the longer that truth stays buried, the longer Lorraine's story remains unfinished. Justice for Lorraine isn't just about one family's darkness. It's about changing the way we see people like her. It's about refusing to accept that a woman's silence means her story should end there, because Lorraine's silence is not the end. It's the beginning of a reckoning. She may never speak the words, but through us, she can finally be heard. Her truth is a mirror, forcing us to confront how society treats those who cannot fight back. The shame isn't Lorraine's. It never was. The shame belongs to those who hurt her, those who hid the truth, and those who still refuse to face it. 50 years of silence is long enough. The time for justice is now, if you believe Lorraine deserves her day in court. If you believe every victim, no matter how long it takes, deserves justice, leave a comment below. Your voice can be part of hers, because silence protected the guilty, but speaking out, speaking for Lorraine, can finally protect the truth. Justice for Lorraine. Surviving rape, demanding truth continues. Not just her family, but the entire network of social workers, law enforcement, and community members who turned away. Everyone failed Lorraine because someone knew, someone had to know. A young, mentally challenged woman living in rural West Virginia doesn't become pregnant without the people around her noticing. A neighbor saw, the family saw, the community saw. Yet no one asked questions. No one reported it. No one protected her. Lorraine's pregnancy should have sounded every alarm. It should have sparked outrage. It should have brought police officers, caseworkers, investigators, but idea in single quotes. Instead, silence blanketed the truth, and West Virginia, a place already struggling with poverty and generational neglect, became the perfect hiding place for injustice. When you look at Lorraine's life, you begin to see the cracks in the system that allowed this to happen. The mental health system failed her, the justice system ignored her, and her own family, the people who should have been her shield, became part of the silence that destroyed her innocence. Lorraine's disability should have meant protection. Instead, it made her invisible. For too long, society has treated people with intellectual disabilities as less than, as if their voices don't count. Their pain doesn't matter, and their rights don't exist. When they are abused, it's dismissed. When they are assaulted, it's forgotten. And when they give birth to the children of their abusers, it's covered up with shame instead of justice. Lorraine is not the first, and that is the real tragedy across the country. There are thousands of Lorraine's women and girls with disabilities who have been sexually assaulted by family members, caregivers, or trusted individuals. Studies have shown that people with intellectual disabilities are 7 times more likely to be victims of sexual assault than those without disabilities. 7 times. And yet, fewer than 10% of those cases ever reach a courtroom. Why? Because they can't testify. Because They can't identify their attackers because families are embarrassed, because police officers don't believe them, because the system isn't built for them. Lorraine's story sits at the center of this failure. It forces us to ask, what does justice even mean for someone who cannot speak? Justice isn't just a courtroom verdict. Justice is being believed. Justice is being protected. Justice is knowing that your pain matters. Lorraine never got that chance. When Mark Leda documented her family for Soft White Underbelly, he didn't just capture dysfunction, he captured the consequences of neglect. The interviews revealed more than just poverty or isolation. They showed a family bound by generational trauma, where love and abuse coexisted under one roof, and where truth was treated like poison. When Mark asked who Timmy's father was, you could feel the tension. It wasn't just shame. It was fear. Fear of exposure, fear of judgment, fear of losing control of the narrative. And yet, despite their denial and deflection, the truth slipped through. The truth has a way of doing that. The world now knows that Lorraine was raped. We may not know by whom, but we know it happened. That truth alone is enough to demand accountability. West Virginia's law is clear. There is no longer a statute of limitations for felony sex crimes, including rape. That means Lorraine's case is not too old. It's not too late. A proper investigation could still take place. DNA testing could still be done. Her story could still be rewritten. Not as a tragedy, but as a fight for justice. Lorraine deserves that fight. For nearly 50 years, she's lived with the consequences of one man's crime and one family's silence. Every day of her life since then has been a reflection of what was stolen from her, her innocence, her autonomy, her voice. Now she lives under protective custody. Safe at last. But safe doesn't mean free. Because even if her body is finally protected, her spirit still carries the weight of unanswered questions. Who hurt her? Who knew and said nothing? Who watched and stayed silent? And perhaps most painfully, why did no one ever fight for her? Injustice thrives in silence. And Lorraine's life became the perfect storm of silence, a storm made of fear, shame, and generational trauma. The Whiters were not just poor. They were trapped, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Their family history is filled with dysfunction that runs so deep, it blurs the line between victim and enabler. But that cannot erase the fact that a crime was committed. When people look at the Whiters, they often see entertainment. They see shock value. They see a viral story about inbreeding and poverty. But what they should see is a broken justice system, a system that should have noticed Lorraine when she got pregnant, a system that should have intervened when she gave birth, a system that should have asked questions, collected evidence, and sought justice. But no one asked. No one cared enough to ask. And that is how evil hides, not in darkness, but in apathy. If Lorraine had been a woman with wealth, privilege, or power, her story would have been front-page news decades ago. There would have been police investigations, lawyers, and trials. But because she was poor, disabled, and unseen, her pain became just another forgotten tragedy in America's hidden history of neglect. Yet, something has changed. The world knows her name now. Millions have watched her story, and in that visibility lies the power to finally break the silence. When people hear justice for Lorraine, they are not just hearing one woman's cry. They are hearing the echo of every silenced victim whose story was dismissed. They are hearing the truth of what happens when a society values secrecy more than justice. Lorraine's silence speaks louder than words. Her eyes, the way she looks around a room, the way her face stiffens when her family talks about her past. They say everything. They tell us she remembers. They tell us she knows. The mind may struggle to form words, but the body never forgets. The trauma is there, written in her every movement. It's a language of pain that too many refuse to understand. Lorraine's case matters. Not just for her, but for every disabled woman who's ever been told, you don't count. Because if the world can fight for Lorraine, a woman who cannot speak, it can fight for anyone. This is why reopening her case matters. This is why Demanding truth matters. This is why your voice matters. The system may have ignored her, but we don't have to. We can be the ones who refuse to let her name fade. We can be the ones who demand accountability from a justice system that's been silent for too long. We can be the ones who prove that even 50 years later, justice is still possible. Lorraine didn't get to choose her story, but we can choose how it ends. Will it end with silence or with truth? Will it end with shame or with justice? We must decide, because every time we look away, another Lorraine suffers in silence. Another voice is lost. Another story dies unheard. But every time we speak out, every time we say her name, the silence cracks a little more. Lorraine deserves for the silence to break completely. She deserves her truth to be heard. No matter how long it's been buried, she deserves the world to remember not what was done to her, but what she survived. Her survival is her strength. Her silence is her scream. Her life is her testimony. The fight for Lorraine's justice is a fight for human decency, a reminder that no one, no matter how poor, disabled, or forgotten, is beyond the right to truth. You believe Lorraine deserves justice if you believe her. Silence matters. Comment below, because the truth doesn't fade with time. It waits, and Lorraine's truth has waited long enough. 50 years of silence. 50 years of unanswered questions. 50 years of injustice. It's time to break the silence. It's time to demand the truth. It's time to fight for Lorraine. Justice for Lorraine isn't just a story, it's a movement. And movements begin when one person decides to speak. So speak. Speak for Lorraine. Speak for every survivor who cannot. Speak for the truth that silence tried to bury. This is not just her story. It's ours. Justice for Lorraine. Surviving rape, demanding truth continues. She never asked for fame. She never asked to be seen. Lorraine only wanted peace, and perhaps love, yet the world found her, sitting quietly beside her family, her face half hidden but unforgettable. The woman who could not speak somehow said more to the world with her silence than most do with their words, and in that silence, that still, aching quiet, a movement began, a cry for justice, a demand for truth, a promise that Lorraine would no longer be forgotten. Lorraine's story has reached millions. It has sparked conversations about trauma, disability, and accountability. But for all the noise, the one thing that still hasn't been found is the truth. Who raped Lorraine? Who fathered Timmy? Who stood by and watched it happen? Who decided that silence was easier than justice? These are not just questions for the wider family. These are questions for all of us. Because Lorraine's pain didn't happen in isolation. It happened in a world that allowed it, a world that looked away, that dismissed her, that whispered instead of shouting for her. Every person who ignored the signs shares a piece of that guilt, and that guilt runs deep for generations. Families like the Whiters have lived in silence, isolated, misunderstood, and trapped in cycles of abuse and denial. Poverty doesn't excuse evil, but it can breed desperation. And desperation breeds silence. Lorraine's story shines a brutal light on what happens when silence becomes tradition, when people grow up believing that pain is normal, that trauma should be hidden, that victims should just move on. But Lorraine never could move on. How could she? Her life became a living monument to what was taken from her, a wound that never closed. And every day she lived beside her siblings, she was reminded of it. Yet, despite everything, Lorraine survived. She survived the violence. She survived the shame. She survived the silence. That survival is not weakness. It's power. It's the quiet, unyielding strength that refuses to die, the kind of strength that keeps breathing, even when the world turns its back. And that's why her story matters. Because for every Lorraine, there are countless others who will never be heard. There are young girls right now in rural towns, in nursing homes, in foster care, in institutions, being abused in silence, and just like Lorraine, they're unseen, unbelieved, unprotected. This story isn't only about what happened 50 years ago. It's about what continues to happen today. Every time a victim is silenced, every time a disabled person is ignored, every time a woman's pain is minimized, the system fails again. That's why justice for Lorraine isn't just a plea. It's a call to action. Justice for Lorraine means more than reopening an old case. It means confronting the structures that let this happen and ensuring it never happens again. It means demanding reform in how we treat sexual assault survivors with disabilities. It means teaching caregivers, social workers, and police officers that nonverbal does not mean unaware. It means training investigators to recognize abuse even when the victim can't describe it. It means caring enough to listen, not just to words, but to silence, because silence has a sound. Lorraine's silence is deafening. It echoes through every pause, every glance, every half-smile that hides a lifetime of pain. It's the sound of injustice, the sound of endurance. The sound of truth waiting to be heard. Lorraine's case could still be solved. Science has advanced. DNA testing could confirm paternity. Investigators could question the remaining family members. There are no legal barriers now. West Virginia law allows prosecution of rape at any time. All it would take is one brave prosecutor, one determined detective, one person willing to care. Justice doesn't always come through the courts. Sometimes justice begins with awareness. Sometimes it starts with a name being spoken aloud, again and again, until people can no longer pretend they didn't hear it. Lorraine say her name. Not with pity. Not with mockery, but with reverence, because she represents something sacred. The unbreakable will to live after being broken. Lorraine survived what many would not have. And though her story is filled with pain, it also carries a powerful truth that survival is, in itself, a form of resistance. The world may not have protected her when she was a child, but now, as people around the world learn her story, something powerful is happening. People are angry, people are heartbroken, people are speaking up. And that is where healing begins. Justice for Lorraine means changing how we see women like her. It means realizing that every person, no matter their disability, has a right to dignity, protection, and love. It means that silence will never again be allowed to bury truth, because Lorraine's life has already spoken the message we need to hear. Every life has value. Every victim deserves justice. Every silence hides a story. So what happens next? That depends on us. It depends on whether we care enough to demand answers, whether we push for investigations, whether we amplify her story until the world has no choice but to listen. Lorraine cannot tell her story, but we can. Lorraine cannot demand justice, but we can demand it for her. Lorraine cannot confront her rapist, but the truth can. And truth has power. Truth doesn't age. Truth doesn't die. No matter how many years have passed, truth will always find a way to rise. And Lorraine's truth is rising now, through every person who watches, shares, and refuses to forget. Because the moment we forget her, the silence wins again, and Lorraine's story deserves more than silence. She deserves a legacy. A legacy of strength. A legacy of survival. A legacy of justice. The fight for Lorraine is a fight for every survivor who was told, "You don't matter." It's a fight against the culture of silence that allowed her suffering to be ignored for half a century. It's a fight for every disabled person who was overlooked, unheard, and unprotected. Her story is painful, but pain has power when it's shared. Pain can spark empathy. Pain can create change. Pain can demand justice. Lorraine's silence is not the end of her story. It's the foundation of it. From that silence rises a movement. From that silence rises truth. From that silence rises justice. And justice is not just for Lorraine. It's for Timmy, too, the son she never asked for but loved anyway. It's for the generations who will come after her, who deserve a world where no one is forgotten because they cannot speak. It's for every woman who's ever been silenced, shamed, or ignored. Lorraine's eyes, quiet, distant yet knowing, hold the kind of truth that never Dies. They hold the truth of what it means to endure. To survive. To exist despite injustice. The world cannot take back what was done to her, but we can give her what she was denied: recognition, respect, and a voice. Lorraine's story reminds us that justice delayed is not justice denied. Not if we refuse to let go. Not if we keep fighting. Not if we keep her name alive. She may never speak, but her silence has moved millions. Her story has become a symbol of resilience, of survival, of truth's refusal to stay buried. And so the movement continues. Justice for Lorraine. Justice for every victim who was forgotten. Justice for every survivor who still waits to be believed. Because 50 years of silence is long enough. Because justice has no expiration date. Because truth always deserves to be heard. Lorraine's story doesn't end here. It lives in the hearts of those who choose to speak when others are silent. It lives in every comment, every post, every act of courage that says, I see you, I believe you, you matter. Lorraine matters. Her story matters, and her silence, that sacred, powerful silence, has become a roar that will never fade. Justice for Lorraine is not just because it's a promise. Promise that her pain will not be ignored. A promise that her name will not be forgotten. Promise that no more victims will suffer unseen. So speak. Speak her name, speak her truth, speak for justice, because the world needs to hear what Lorraine could never say, that silence is not peace. And truth is stronger than fear. Justice for Lorraine, surviving rape, demanding truth, breaking silence. Her voice lives in ours. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.